The common area of the merchant vessel Wandering Prophet hummed with the usual sounds of off-shift relaxation when Marcus Webb settled into his corner seat with a small cleaning kit and his knife. 6 months into the voyage, and the crew had grown used to the various quirks of their human mechanic. Marcus kept to himself mostly and did his work without complaint, but there was something about him that made the others keep a polite distance. The insectoid Vraxi traders would click their mandibles in greeting, but never lingered for conversation. The aquatic Delphians gave him space in the corridors, and the crystalline Koresh seemed content to ignore him entirely. Marcus didn't mind the isolation. He had signed on to this merchant run precisely because it was quiet and predictable day after day. He repaired engines and maintained systems and asked nothing of anyone. But now, in the dimly lit common area, he performed a ritual that always drew curious glances, even if no one had yet worked up the courage to ask about it. The knife came out of its sheath with a whisper of metal on leather. It was roughly 8 inches long, with a blade that caught the overhead lights in strange ways. The steel seemed to shift between mirror bright and shadow dark, depending on the angle. Marcus laid out his cleaning supplies with methodical precision. A small bottle of oil sat beside a worn cloth, and a tiny brush with bristles so fine they could work into the smallest grooves. He began with the blade itself and wiped away the thin film of oil from the previous cleaning. His movements were smooth and practiced, like someone who had done this thousands of times before. The blade gleamed under his attention, and as he worked, the etchings along its length became more visible. Symbols and emblems ran down the fuller in a line of intricate detail. From across the room, Chattik watched with growing fascination. The young Vraxi navigator had only been with the crew for 3 months, and his curiosity often overrode his natural caution. He had seen weapons before, of course. Every species carried tools appropriate to their nature, but there was something different about the way Marcus handled this particular blade. It wasn't the casual grip of someone holding a utility tool, and it wasn't the reverent touch of someone handling a religious artifact either. It was something in between, as if the knife represented both mundane routine and profound significance. Chattik's compound eyes tracked every movement as Marcus applied fresh oil to the blade and worked it into the metal with small circular motions. The human's face remained neutral and almost meditative. The Vraxi's curiosity finally won out over his hesitation. He stood from his own seat and crossed the common area with the slightly awkward gait of his species. His chitinous legs clicked against the deck plating, and his antennae waved in what his people considered a gesture of peaceful approach. Marcus looked up as Chattik approached, but didn't stop his cleaning motions. His expression remained neutral, but not unfriendly. "May this one inquire about your blade?" Chattik asked in the standard galactic trade language that all crew members used for communication. Marcus glanced at the knife, then back at the Vraxi. "It's just a knife," he said simply. "But the markings." Chattik gestured with one of his forearms toward the symbols etched into the steel. "They appear significant. In Vraxi culture, such etchings denote family lineages or territorial claims." Marcus was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to say. He continued his cleaning motions, and the oil glistened on the blade's surface. "They're service markers," Marcus finally said. Jack tilted his head in a way that indicated confusion among his people. "Service markers?" "Military service," Marcus clarified. "Each symbol represents a campaign or operation." The Vraxi's antennae stiffened slightly. He knew humans had been involved in various conflicts since joining the galactic community, but the details were often vague. Most species didn't ask too many questions about human military operations. There were rumors, of course, and whispered stories, but concrete information was surprisingly hard to find. How many campaigns? Chattik asked before he could stop himself. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held the blade up to the light and examined it for any spots he might have missed. The symbols seemed to glow in the illumination. "Enough," Marcus said finally, from the other side of the common area. A Delphian merchant named Sarish had been half listening to the conversation. Now his translucent form shifted in his environmental suit as he moved closer. "I had wondered about your past," Sarish said in his bubbling voice. "You have the efficiency of someone with training, but you work as a mechanic." Marcus set the blade down on the cloth and picked up the small brush. He began working it into the grooves where the handle met the guard. "Mechanics was always the plan," Marcus said. "The military was just a detour." "A long detour?" Surish asked. "Long enough." By now several other crew members had noticed the conversation and were paying attention even if they hadn't moved closer. A pair of Koresh traders maintained their crystalline stillness, but their facets were oriented toward Marcus's corner. Jack Dick leaned in slightly to get a better look at the emblems. His compound eyes could pick out details that most species would miss. The first symbol near the handle showed a stylized planet with radiating lines. It looked almost decorative, but there was a precision to the etching that suggested official military insignia. The second emblem depicted what looked like a mountain, or perhaps a large rock formation with stars above it. The lines were sharp and geometric. The third symbol made CHKTIK's antennae flatten involuntarily. It showed two blades crossed over each other with what appeared to be a shield behind them. Even without knowing its specific meaning, the emblem carried a weight that transcended cultural understanding. "What does that one mean?" Chektik asked and pointed to the crossed blades. Marcus followed the gesture, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He continued brushing the handle junction, but his movements became more deliberate. "That one's not important anymore," he said, but the way he said it and the tension that briefly crossed his features suggested the exact opposite. Surish moved even closer now, and his environmental suit servos whirred softly. "I think perhaps it is very important," the Delphian said. Marcus looked up at the gathering crew members. More had moved into listening range now, and the common area had grown quieter. Even the ambient ship sound seemed muted. He set down the brush and picked up the cloth again. He began a final wipe down of the blade, and his movements remained steady despite the attention. "Look," Marcus said without looking up. "I signed on to fix engines and maintain systems. My past is my own business." "Of course," Kittik said quickly. This one meant no offense. "None taken," Marcus replied. "But some things are better left in the past." He finished his cleaning and held the blade up one last time to inspect his work. The metal gleamed, and the symbols stood out in sharp relief. Then, with practiced ease, he slid the knife back into its sheath, and the emblems disappeared from view. But Jack Tick had seen them now, and his curiosity was far from satisfied. As Marcus gathered his cleaning supplies, the Vraxi made a mental note to research human military symbols when he returned to his quarters. Something about those emblems suggested a story far more complex than a simple mechanic's past. And the way Marcus had avoided explaining the cross-blade symbol made it clear that whatever those emblems represented, it was something the human carried with him every day. Something he couldn't quite leave behind no matter how far he traveled or how mundane his current work became. Jack Tick couldn't let it go. After Marcus left the common area, the young Vraxi returned to his quarters and accessed the ship's database. His clawed fingers moved across the holographic interface as he searched for information about human military insignia. The database was extensive, but frustratingly vague when it came to human military operations. Most entries were brief summaries that raised more questions than they answered. He found references to something called the Solar Guard, which appeared to be humanity's primary defensive fleet. The symbol matched the first emblem on Marcus's blade, a planet with radiating lines. The second symbol took longer to identify. After cross-referencing several databases, Chektik finally found a match. It represented something called the Titan Rebellion, a conflict that had occurred roughly 15 years ago in the outer colonies. The database entry was brief. It mentioned a suppression campaign and listed human forces as primary responders, but provided almost no details about the actual fighting. The third symbol with the cross blades proved even more difficult to research. Shaktik searched for hours, but found only oblique references and redacted documents. What he did find made his antennae quiver with unease. The symbol belonged to something called the Terran Extinction Prevention Unit. The name alone suggested a level of violence that most civilized species had moved beyond centuries ago. Shaktik spent the rest of his off-shift reading everything he could find about human military operations. The picture that emerged was disturbing in its implications. By the time the next shift cycle began, he had formed a theory he needed to test. He found Marcus in the lower engineering bay, working on one of the coolant regulators. The human was elbow-deep in machinery, and his coveralls were stained with various fluids. "Marcus," Shaktik said as he approached, "this one has questions." Marcus pulled his arm out of the machinery and wiped his hands on a rag. "About the knife?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus sighed and set down his tools. He gestured to a nearby crate, and both of them sat. "All right," Marcus said. "What do you want to know?" "The first symbol," Shaktik began. "It represents the Solar Guard? You served in humanity's defensive fleet?" "For 3 years," Marcus confirmed. "Standard rotation, nothing special." "And the second symbol? The Titan Rebellion?" Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "That was less standard," he said. "The database says it was a suppression campaign but provides no details." "That's intentional," Marcus said. "The Titan colonies attempted to break away from Earth's governance. They had legitimate grievances, but they went about addressing them in the wrong way." "Violence?" Shaktik asked. "On both sides," Marcus admitted. "The rebellion lasted 8 months before it was put down. A lot of people died. Colonists and soldiers both." CHKTIK's antennae waved in a gesture that meant understanding among his people. "Civil conflicts were always complicated and messy." "And the third symbol?" he asked carefully. "The crossblades?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. His eyes focused on something far away, as if seeing events that existed only in memory. "That's the Tepu insignia," he said finally. "Terran Extinction Prevention Unit. This one found references but little information," Shaktik said. "That's also intentional," Marcus replied. Tepu was created to handle threats that targeted entire populations. When a colony faced genocide or when a species engaged in genocidal warfare, Tepu deployed. The casual way Marcus said those words made them even more chilling. "You were part of this unit?" Shaktik asked. "For 7 years," Marcus said. "We deployed to 18 different conflicts during that time. 18 conflicts in 7 years. Shak did the mental math and realized that meant Marcus had been in almost constant combat for nearly a decade. How does one endure such things? The Vraxi asked. Marcus picked up a bolt from the deck and turned it over in his fingers. "Training helps," he said, "but mostly you just focus on the mission. You don't think about the bigger picture. You do your job and trust that command knows what they're doing. But you must have seen terrible things." "Yes," Marcus said simply. Before Shaktik could ask another question, the common area's announcement system crackled to life. Captain Torish's voice requested all off-duty crew to report to the common area for a general meeting. Marcus and Shaktik made their way up from engineering and found most of the crew already assembled. The Delphian captain floated in his environmental suit at the front of the room. But Torish's attention immediately fixed on Marcus as he entered. The captain's translucent form shifted in a way that indicated surprise. "Mechanic Webb," Torish said. "I was reviewing crew files and noticed an inconsistency in your service record." Marcus's expression remained neutral. "What kind of inconsistency?" "Your file lists you as former Solar Guard with engineering specialization," Torish said. "But there's a gap of nearly 10 years that's marked as classified." The room had gone very quiet. Every crew member was now paying attention. "That's correct," Marcus said. "I did some additional research," Torish continued. And I found references to a classified operation called Cascade. Do you know anything about that? Marcus's jaw tightened. I might. Toresh moved closer, and his voice took on an edge that Jektik had never heard before. I lost family to Kresh Dominion raids, the captain said. My birth waters were poisoned by their biological weapons. My siblings died screaming. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Operation Cascade ended the Kresh Dominion, Toresh said. 13 human ships against a fleet of over 200. The operation lasted 6 days and resulted in the complete collapse of the Kresh military structure. Marcus stood very still. The symbol on your blade? Toresh pressed. The one you didn't explain to young Jektik? It's a coiled serpent with 13 stars. That's the Cascade operation insignia. Every eye in the room was now locked on Marcus. Were you there? Toresh asked. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Yes, Marcus finally said. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Surish spoke up from across the room. The Kresh Dominion controlled 17 systems, the Delphian merchant said. They had been expanding for 50 years. How did 13 ships destroy them? Marcus looked at the assembled crew. His expression was tired and perhaps a bit sad. We didn't destroy them, he said. We broke them. There's a difference. Explain. Captain Toresh commanded. Marcus leaned against the bulkhead. The Kresh were powerful because they were brutal and unpredictable, he said. They used terror as a weapon. Most species couldn't match their willingness to inflict suffering. But humans could? Jektik asked. Humans could understand it, Marcus corrected. We've studied warfare for thousands of years. Not just the tactics, but the psychology. We understood what made the Kresh effective, and we knew how to counter it. How? Surish asked. We were more brutal, Marcus said flatly. Not because we enjoyed it, but because we understood that's what the situation required. We showed them that their tactics wouldn't work on us, and that trying to use them would result in overwhelming retaliation. The crew shifted uncomfortably. Tepu specialized in psychological warfare as much as physical combat, Marcus continued. We studied every species we encountered and learned what frightened them and what motivated them. The Kresh believed they were apex predators. We proved them wrong. By becoming worse predators? A Koresh trader asked in a crystalline voice. By being willing to do what needed to be done, Marcus said. The Kresh had to believe that continuing their expansion would cost them everything. So we made sure they believed it. Captain Toresh floated closer. My family, he said quietly. Did you encounter Kresh units that used biological weapons? Marcus met the captain's eyes. Yes, he said. We encountered several. They were neutralized. How many operations were you part of during Cascade? All of them, Marcus said. I was part of the primary strike team for the entire 6 days. The implications of that statement rippled through the crew. 6 days of continuous combat operations against an enemy known for their brutality. Jektik's antennae were flat against his head. The quiet mechanic who fixed their engines had been part of one of the most significant military operations in recent galactic history. Why didn't you tell us? Surish asked. Marcus shrugged. Because it's not who I am anymore, he said. That was a job I did because it needed doing. Now I fix engines because that's what needs doing. But you carry the knife, Toresh observed. I carry the reminder, Marcus corrected. The emblems are a record of what I'm capable of and what I choose not to be. The meeting dissolved shortly after as crew members returned to their duties. But everything had changed. The quiet human mechanic was now something else in their eyes. Something dangerous that had chosen to be docile. And that choice somehow made him more unsettling than if he had been overtly threatening all along. The common area had become an impromptu gathering place, as crew members found excuses to linger after Captain Toresh's revelation about Marcus's past. No one wanted to return to their duties without understanding more about the human who had been living and working Among them for 6 months. Marcus remained leaning against the bulkhead, and his posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room. It was a subtle shift in behavior that several crew members now noticed. The quiet mechanic had always been observant, but now they recognized it for what it was. Tactical awareness maintained even in supposedly safe environments. A Koresh priest named Valshara moved forward with the slow, deliberate movements characteristic of her crystalline species. Her facets caught the light and cast rainbow patterns across the deck. "Mechanic Webb," she said in the resonant tones of her people. "This one must speak a concern." Marcus nodded for her to continue. "Violence on the scale you describe," Valshara said. "It corrupts the soul. The Koresh people abandoned warfare 8,000 years ago because we discovered that those who master violence become slaves to it." "You're not wrong," Marcus said, and his response surprised everyone. Valshara's facets shifted in what might have been confusion. "You agree?" "Of course," Marcus said. "Carrying that much violence changes you. It has to. You can't see the things I've seen and do the things I've done without it leaving marks. Then how do you maintain moral integrity?" The Koresh priest asked. Marcus pushed off from the bulkhead and walked to the center of the room. Every eye followed him. "I don't know that I do," he admitted. "That's why I clean the knife. It's a meditation and a reminder. Every time I see those emblems, I remember what I'm capable of and what I've chosen not to be anymore." Chaktik's antennae waved in confusion. "But surely you believed your actions were justified?" The young Vraxi asked. "Justified and moral aren't always the same thing," Marcus replied. "Were my actions necessary? Probably. Were they good? That's a much harder question." Surish moved his environmental suit closer to the circle that was forming around Marcus. "You speak as if you carry guilt," the Delphian merchant observed. "I carry responsibility," Marcus corrected. "Guilt implies I think I made wrong choices. Responsibility means I own the choices I made, even if they were the best options available at the time." Captain Torish had been quiet since his initial revelation, but now he spoke again. "The Koresh killed millions," he said. "Your actions ended that. How is that not clearly moral?" Marcus looked at the Delphian captain with an expression that might have been sadness. "Because the methods matter," he said. "Ending evil through evil means might be necessary, but it's not clean or simple. I stopped the Koresh, but I used tactics that would horrify most civilized species." "What kind of tactics?" a crew member asked from the back. Marcus shook his head. "That's not something I'm going to detail," he said. "Just know that Tepu existed because someone had to be willing to fight enemies who didn't respect conventional rules of engagement. We became very good at it." "Too good?" Valshar asked. "Maybe," Marcus said. "That's why I left. I realized I was more effective at violence than I was comfortable with." The room absorbed this statement in silence. Chaktik broke the quiet with another question. "How many battles did you participate in?" Marcus closed his eyes briefly as if counting. 18 major operations across 7 years, he said, plus dozens of smaller engagements that didn't rate their own insignia. "I stopped counting after the first year." "And you survived all of them?" Surish asked. "Obviously," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Though there were close calls, Tepu had a 30% casualty rate. I was lucky, and I was good at my job." "What made humans so effective?" Torish asked. The Koresh had been expanding for half a century, and no species could stop them. How did humans succeed where others failed? Marcus sat down on one of the common area benches. He seemed to be considering how much to reveal. "It comes down to psychology and evolution," he finally said. "Earth was a competitive environment. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and social strategists. We can track prey for days, and we're exceptionally good at understanding and manipulating social dynamics. But so are many species," Valshar pointed out. "True," Marcus agreed. "But humans also have a high tolerance for cognitive dissonance. We can hold contradictory ideas in our heads simultaneously and function effectively. That's crucial in warfare. How so? Jack asked. Because effective soldiers need to be capable of extreme violence while also maintaining empathy and moral reasoning, Marcus explained. Most species struggle with that balance. They're either too empathetic to be effective warriors, or they lose their empathy entirely and become monsters. And humans don't? Torish asked skeptically. Some do, Marcus admitted. But our training focuses on maintaining that balance. We teach soldiers to be capable of violence without becoming violent people. It's a subtle but crucial distinction. Sarush's form shifted in his suit. That sounds like a rationalization, he said. Maybe it is, Marcus replied, but it's also effective. TEPU members were selected for psychological resilience and emotional intelligence. We had to be smart enough to understand our enemies and stable enough not to lose ourselves in the process. Did you lose yourself? Velshara asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Not entirely, he said, but I came close. That's why I left. A younger Vraxi crew member named Tika spoke up from near the wall. What was the worst thing you did? The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus looked at the young Vraxi, and his expression was unreadable. I'm not going to answer that, he said gently. Some things shouldn't be shared. Not because I'm ashamed, but because those memories serve no purpose except to traumatize others. But surely we have a right to know. Tika pressed. You've been living among us, and we didn't know what you were capable of. What I was capable of, Marcus corrected. Past tense, I haven't fired a weapon in anger in over 8 years. I fix engines and maintain systems and mind my own business. But the capacity remains, Torish said. That's what concerns some of us. You're a weapon pretending to be a tool. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. I'm a person, he said firmly. A person with a particular set of skills and experiences. Yes, I'm capable of violence, but I'm also capable of compassion and restraint. The fact that I choose restraint should count for something. Velshara made a harmonious sound that indicated agreement. The choosing is perhaps what matters most, she said. Exactly, Marcus said. Any species can be violent given the right circumstances. What separates civilization from barbarism is the ability to choose not to be violent, even when you have the power to be. Shaktik as antennae waved thoughtfully. So humanity's strength isn't violence itself, but the discipline to control it? That's part of it, Marcus agreed. Humans realized early in our galactic integration that we had an aptitude for warfare. It scared us honestly. We didn't want to be known as the galaxy's soldiers or mercenaries. So what did you do? Suresh asked. We made a choice as a species, Marcus said. We decided to specialize in defensive operations and peacekeeping. We'd be the shield that others could shelter behind, but we'd do it on our terms, with our rules and our oversight. TEPU was part of that? Torish asked. TPU was the dark side of that choice, Marcus said. Someone had to handle threats that couldn't be resolved through conventional means. Someone had to be willing to fight enemies who didn't respect any rules. We volunteered to be those someones. A necessary evil? Velshara asked. A necessary responsibility, Marcus corrected again. Evil implies malicious intent. We didn't enjoy what we did, but we understood it needed doing. The alternative was letting species like the Kresh continue their expansion unchecked. But at what cost to yourselves? The Koresh priest asked. Marcus smiled sadly. That's the question, isn't it? Every TEPU member carries scars, some physical but mostly psychological. We accepted those costs so civilians wouldn't have to. We became comfortable with violence so others could remain uncomfortable with it. That seems like an enormous burden, Chaktik said. It is, Marcus agreed. That's why TEPU has mandatory rotation periods and psychological screening. No one serves more than 10 years. After that, you either transfer to support roles or you separate entirely. I separated. Because you reached your limit? Torish asked. Because I was getting too good at it, Marcus said. I started making decisions faster and more efficiently. The violence was becoming routine. When you stop being bothered by what you're doing, it's time to stop doing it. The crew absorbed this in thoughtful silence. Finally, Surish spoke again. So you fix engines now and carry a knife you never use. I carry a reminder, Marcus said for the second time. Every emblem on that blade represents a choice I made and a cost I paid. I keep it sharp, not because I intend to use it, but because maintaining the capacity while choosing restraint is what separates me from what I fought against. Velshara's facets shimmered. That is perhaps wisdom, she said. Or rationalization, Marcus replied with a slight smile. I'm honestly not sure anymore. But it's the truth I choose to believe. The meeting began to break up as crew members returned to their duties. But the atmosphere on the ship had fundamentally changed. Marcus was no longer just a quiet mechanic. He was a reminder of what lurked beneath civilization's surface and what it took to maintain that civilization. And perhaps most unsettling of all, he was proof that the most dangerous people were often the ones who chose not to use their capabilities, because that choice implied both power and the discipline to wield it. A combination that was far more threatening than simple violence ever could be. The revelation about Marcus's past had created an uncomfortable tension aboard the wandering prophet that persisted for several days. Crew members found themselves watching the human mechanic with new eyes and wondering what other capabilities he kept hidden beneath his quiet demeanor. Some, like Captain Torish, seemed reassured by the knowledge that they had someone with Marcus's skills aboard. Others, particularly Velshara the Koresh priest, remained troubled by the implications. It was during the third day, after the common area meeting, that the philosophical debate truly erupted. Marcus was in the cargo bay, performing routine maintenance on the environmental recyclers when Velshara approached with several other crew members trailing behind her. Mechanic Webb, the crystalline priest, said. We must continue our discussion. Marcus looked up from his work and wiped lubricant from his hands. About what specifically? About the nature of violence and its effect on the soul, Velshara replied. This one has been meditating on your words and finds them troubling. Marcus set down his tools and gestured for her to continue. You claim that carrying such violence doesn't corrupt the soul if one maintains awareness and choice, Velshara said. But this one believes that repeated exposure to extreme violence inevitably damages one's essential nature. Other crew members had begun gathering, and Marcus noticed Chektik and Surish among them, along with several Vraxi, traders and a Delphian engineer. You might be right, Marcus admitted. I'm not sure I can objectively assess my own soul's condition, but you must feel the effects, Velshara pressed. The Koresh studies show that warriors who engage in sustained violence experience fundamental personality changes. They become more aggressive and less empathetic and struggle to reintegrate into peaceful society. That's all true, Marcus agreed. I've seen it happen to others, and I've felt some of those effects myself. Then how can you claim to have maintained your moral integrity? The priest asked. Marcus leaned against the cargo container. I didn't say I maintained it perfectly, he replied. I said I try to maintain awareness of what I've done and what I'm capable of. That's different from claiming I'm undamaged. CHKTIK's antennae waved with interest. So you acknowledge that violence changed you? Of course, Marcus said. Anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or delusional. The question isn't whether violence changes you, but whether you can live with those changes. While still maintaining core principles, Surish moved his environmental suit closer. But what principles can survive such experiences? The Delphian merchant asked, when you've done terrible things in service of good outcomes, how do you maintain moral clarity? Marcus was quiet for a moment as he organized his thoughts. It helps to understand why humans developed the philosophy we did about violence, he finally said. When we joined the galactic community, we were shocked by how peaceful most species were. That seems backwards, Tika said from the edge of the group. Shouldn't peaceful be the default and violence be the aberration? In theory, yes, Marcus replied. But Earth's evolutionary history made us different. We evolved in an environment with significant competition and predation. Humans had to be both intelligent enough to cooperate and aggressive enough to compete. That combination is apparently unusual. Many species evolved from predators, Velshar pointed out. True, Marcus said, but most apex predators are solitary. Humans are pack predators with advanced social intelligence. We can coordinate violence on a scale that most species find disturbing. And this disturbs humanity itself. Check, Tick asked. Very much so, Marcus confirmed. Our first few conflicts in galactic space showed us that we were exceptionally good at warfare. Not because of better technology, but because of better tactical thinking and higher tolerance for sustained operations. Captain Torish entered the cargo bay and joined the gathering. This one remembers the Vegas station incident, he said. Human security forces defended against a crash raid for 11 days straight. Most species would have collapsed from exhaustion after 3 days. Marcus nodded. That's a good example. Humans can push through fatigue and stress in ways that seem almost pathological to other species. It's a survival trait that became a military advantage. And this scared you? Surish asked. It terrified us, Marcus said simply. We realized we could become the galaxy's monsters if we weren't careful. Every species has horror stories about their own history, but humans had a particularly bloody past. We didn't want to repeat that pattern on a galactic scale. Lashara's facets shimmered with what might have been understanding. So humanity chose to constrain itself? We chose to channel our capabilities in specific directions, Marcus clarified. We established strict rules about when and how human military forces could be deployed. We created oversight systems and psychological screening programs. We made violence a profession with codes and limits rather than a cultural default. But Tepu still exists, Torish pointed out. And you still did terrible things in its service. Yes, Marcus agreed. Because sometimes terrible things are necessary. The galaxy isn't a peaceful place, and there are species and groups that will exploit peace-loving cultures. Someone has to be willing to stand between civilization and chaos. But why humans? Tika asked, why does your species have to bear that burden? Marcus smiled sadly. We don't have to, he said. We chose to. When the Crash Dominion was expanding and other species were suffering, we could have stayed neutral. We could have said it wasn't our problem, but we didn't, because you're warriors at heart. Velshara asked with an edge to her resonant voice. Because we understand violence, and we understood what unchecked violence leads to, Marcus corrected. We've been through our own dark ages and our own periods of widespread warfare. We know what happens when violent actors face no effective resistance. They expand until someone stops them. Chektik moved closer with his antennae waving thoughtfully. So, Tepu members are volunteers who take on a burden so others don't have to? That's the idea, Marcus said. Every Tepu member knows what they're signing up for. We know it will change us and possibly damage us, but we believe the alternative is worse. If peaceful species have no defense against predatory ones, then the predators win. A necessary sacrifice? Surish asked. A conscious choice, Marcus emphasized. That's the key distinction. We're not drafted or forced. We volunteer with full knowledge of the costs. And we accept those costs because we believe in protecting those who can't protect themselves. Captain Tarisha's form shifted in his environmental suit. This one must ask, he said. Do you regret your service? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I regret some specific actions, he finally said. Decisions I made that hurt people who didn't deserve it. Mistakes that cost lives. Those regrets keep me awake sometimes. But the overall service? Toresh pressed. No, Marcus said firmly. I don't regret stopping the crash or protecting colonies that would have been destroyed. I don't regret the fact that my actions meant other people got to live peaceful lives. The methods were ugly, but the outcome was worth it. Velshara made a discordant chime. This one cannot accept that reasoning, she said. To claim that evil methods in service of good outcomes are justified is moral relativism of the worst kind. I'm not claiming it's justified, Marcus replied. I'm claiming it was necessary. There's a difference. Explain that difference, the Koresh priest demanded. Marcus stood and walked to the center of the gathered crew. Justified implies moral correctness, he said. Necessary only implies practical requirement. I can acknowledge that my actions were morally compromised while also maintaining that they were the best available options in terrible circumstances. That's sophistry, Velshara said. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but it's also honest. I'm not trying to claim the moral high ground. I'm acknowledging that sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. TEPU exists because someone has to make those choices and live with the consequences. And you carry those consequences? Chektik asked. Every day, Marcus confirmed. He reached down and touched the knife sheathed at his belt. That's what these emblems represent, not achievements or victories, but costs and choices. Every symbol is a reminder of what I did and why I did it and what it cost me. Then why keep the knife at all? Tika asked, why not dispose of it and move on? Marcus's hand remained on the knife's handle. Because forgetting would be worse, he said. If I threw away the knife and pretended my past didn't exist, I'd be denying the reality of what I did. The people who died because of my actions deserve to be remembered, even if only by me. That sounds like self-flagellation, Suresh observed. It's accountability, Marcus replied. I maintain the blade as a form of meditation. Every time I clean it, I remember what I'm capable of and what I choose not to be anymore. It keeps me honest. Toresh moved closer. And the sharpness? You keep the blade sharp, though you claim never to use it. Because maintaining the capacity while choosing restraint is the entire point, Marcus explained. Any fool can be peaceful when they're powerless. True peace comes from having the ability to cause harm and choosing not to. That's what separates civilization from helplessness. Velshara's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly. This philosophy troubles this one deeply, she said. To celebrate the capacity for violence, even while restraining it, seems to glorify the very thing you claim to have moved beyond. I'm not celebrating it, Marcus said gently. I'm acknowledging it. There's a difference between honest recognition of one's capabilities and glorification of violence. I know what I can do, and I choose not to do it. That choice matters. The cargo bay was quiet as the crew processed his words. Finally, Chektik spoke. So the knife is a symbol of choice? Of conscious choice made daily, Marcus confirmed. I could dull the blade or destroy it entirely. But I keep it sharp as a reminder that restraint means nothing if you're not actually capable of the thing you're restraining. A leashed monster is still a monster, Velshara said quietly. Marcus met her gaze. Perhaps, he said. But a leashed monster that refuses to break its own leash is something else. That's what I'm trying to be. Someone who acknowledges their capacity for darkness while consistently choosing the light. The philosophical debate continued. For some time, with various crew members offering perspectives from their own cultures and experiences. But Marcus's central argument remained consistent, that the acknowledgement of violent capability combined with the disciplined choice of restraint represented the highest form of moral conduct. Whether the crew agreed or not, they couldn't deny the sincerity of his belief. And they couldn't help but notice that despite all his talk of violence and capability, Marcus had spent 6 months aboard their ship without a single aggressive action. The knife remained sheathed and the monster stayed leashed. And perhaps that daily choice not to unleash what lurked within was worth more than a lifetime of simple, peaceful existence, because it implied both power and the wisdom to restrain it. A combination that might be humanity's greatest strength and most dangerous gift to the galaxy. The philosophical debate about Marcus's nature and humanity's relationship with violence had just begun to wind down when the ship's proximity alarms shattered the contemplative mood. Warning lights flashed throughout the wandering prophet, and the alert klaxon sent crew members scrambling to their stations. Captain Torish's voice came over the ship-wide communication system, tense but controlled. All crew to emergency stations. We have multiple contacts approaching on intercept vectors. They're not responding to hails. Marcus was already moving before Tarish finished speaking, and his casual demeanor had vanished instantly. Chektik, who was still near him in the cargo bay, watched in fascination as the human's entire body language shifted. Where before Marcus had been relaxed and open, he now moved with precise economy, and his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings for threats and opportunities. "Come on," Marcus said to CHK to IK. "We need to get to the bridge." They ran through the corridors with Marcus, somehow navigating the ship's layout faster than Chektik, despite the Vraxi having served aboard for 3 months. On the bridge, they found Captain Torish coordinating with the helm officer while Surish monitored the sensor displays. "What are we looking at?" Marcus asked as he entered. Torish's translucent form rippled with agitation. "4 vessels," he said. "Light cruiser class with weapon signatures consistent with Kresh Dominion designs. The Kresh were disbanded 8 years ago," Velshara said from her station. "Remnants, then," Marcus said as he moved to study the tactical display. "Probably pirates using old Kresh equipment and tactics." "They're hailing us," the communications officer reported. "Put it through," Torish commanded. The view screen activated and showed a scarred insectoid face that belonged to no species CHK recognized. It was likely a hybrid or possibly a member of one of the client races the Kresh had dominated. "Merchant vessel," the pirate leader said in accented galactic trade language. "You will cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Comply and you may survive." Captain Torish moved closer to the screen. "This is a registered merchant vessel operating under Council protection," he said. "Any attack will be considered an act of piracy, and we don't care about your Council," the pirate interrupted. "Cut engines now, or we open fire. You have 2 minutes to decide." The screen went dark. Torish turned to his crew. "Options?" he asked. "We can't outrun them," the helm officer reported. "Their ships are faster and more maneuverable. Our weapons are minimal," Surish added. "Defensive screens and a single particle beam designed for clearing debris. We couldn't fight off 1 cruiser, let alone 4. Then we prepare to be boarded," Torish said heavily. "We'll cooperate and hope they take what they want and leave." "They won't," Marcus said quietly. Every head turned toward him. "Former Kresh forces don't leave witnesses," Marcus continued. "Especially not if they're operating in Council space. They'll take your cargo, then vent the crew compartments." Clean and simple. Fear rippled through the bridge crew. "How can you be certain?" Torish asked. "Because I studied their tactics for 7 years," Marcus replied. "And because I recognized the hull markings on the lead ship. That's a modified hunter-killer design. They're not equipped for cargo hauling, and they're overgunned for simple piracy. They're hunting soft targets for resources and eliminating evidence." "Then we're dead," Velshara said, and her crystalline voice carried a note of resignation. Marcus looked at the tactical display with his eyes moving across the data with practiced speed. "Not necessarily," he said. "What are you thinking?" Torish asked. "I'm thinking I need 30 minutes and access to the ship systems," Marcus said. And I'm thinking you need to trust me. Trust you to do what? Suresh demanded. Marcus turned to face the captain directly. Trust me to be what I was trained to be, he said. Just one more time. The bridge was silent as everyone absorbed the implications. You want to fight? Toresh asked. I want to make them leave, Marcus corrected. Fighting would be suicide with our armament, but there are other ways to win. Shaktik's antennae were rigid with tension. What ways? He asked. Marcus moved to the tactical console. Tepu train covered asymmetric warfare, he said. How to defeat superior forces through psychological manipulation and tactical exploitation of weaknesses. The pirates have 4 cruisers, Velshara pointed out. What weakness could we possibly exploit? Their overconfidence, Marcus said. They think we're helpless sheep. We're going to show them we're not, and more importantly, we're going to make them believe that continuing their attack will cost them more than they're willing to pay. Captain Toresh's form shifted as he considered. 1 minute 40 seconds until they expect our response, he said. Captain, Marcus said urgently, if you let me do this, I can get us out of here without anyone dying. But I need you to trust me, and I need access to systems I probably shouldn't have access to. Toresh floated in his suit for several long seconds while the bridge crew waited. All right, the captain finally said. You have your 30 minutes. What do you need? Marcus's transformation was immediate and complete. Gong was the contemplative mechanic who philosophized about violence and choice. In his place stood someone who moved with absolute confidence and gave orders with the expectation of instant obedience. I need full access to communications and environmental controls and the cargo bay manifest, Marcus rattled off. Checked. I need you at sensors. Call out any changes in their formation or weapon status. Suresh, get down to engineering and prepare to vent cargo bay 3 on my signal. Why would we? Suresh began. Because I'm going to convince them we have something worth dying for, Marcus interrupted. And then I'm going to make them believe we're insane enough to destroy it rather than let them have it. Move now. The Delphian hesitated only a moment before rushing from the bridge. Marcus's fingers flew across the communications console. Captain, open a channel to the pirates. They said 2 minutes, Toresh protested. We're not waiting, Marcus said. Open the channel now. Toresh complied, and the scarred pirate face reappeared on screen. We're responding early, Marcus said before the pirate could speak. His voice had changed and carried an edge of barely controlled aggression. Who are you? The pirate demanded. Former Tepu, Marcus said flatly. Cascade veteran, and you're about to make a very stupid mistake. The pirate's expression shifted slightly. You're bluffing, he said. This is a merchant vessel. Was a merchant vessel, Marcus replied. Until you decided to attack a ship carrying Class 7 hazardous materials through Council space. Now it's a potential incident that will bring actual military response. Chaktik watched in amazement as Marcus lied with absolute confidence. You're hauling hazmat? The pirate asked with suspicion evident in his voice. Unstable reactor cores being transported for disposal, Marcus improvised. Hence the minimal armament and the routing through this sector. We're supposed to be avoiding populated areas. Scan them, the pirate ordered someone off screen. Marcus smiled coldly. Go ahead and scan, he said. You'll detect the reactor signatures in Cargo Bay 3. You'll also detect the environmental instability we're working very hard to contain. He nodded to Toresh, who was staring at him in confusion. The captain seemed to understand and manipulated his own console. Marcus had accessed the environmental systems and was now causing cell fluctuations in Cargo Bay 3 that would show up on external scans as potential containment failure. What are you doing? The pirate demanded as his crew apparently reported what they were seeing. What does it look like? Marcus snapped. We're trying to keep this cargo stable, which would be a lot easier if we weren't dealing with your threats. Back off or I start venting the bay. and you can explain to your crew why you're all being irradiated." "You wouldn't," the pirate said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I'm former Tepu," Marcus said. "Do you really want to test what I'm willing to do? I've done worse than dying in a radioactive cloud, and I can tell you from experience that scared pirates make mistakes. You're about to make a fatal one." Chaktik saw what Marcus was doing now. The human wasn't just lying about the cargo. He was building a psychological profile of their attackers, in real time and exploiting their fears and uncertainties. "Our sensors show reactor cores," another voice said from the pirate bridge. "But the readings are fluctuating. Could be unstable or could be faked. So board us and find out," Marcus challenged. "Send your crew into potentially contaminated compartments to check if the crazy human is bluffing. What's the worst that could happen? All right, your entire boarding party dies of radiation exposure." The pirate leader's face twisted with indecision. "Or," Marcus continued in a more reasonable tone, "you could leave now and find easier prey. We're not worth the risk, and you know it. Even if the cargo is stable, is it worth potential exposure? Is it worth drawing to EPU attention? Because if you kill a former unit member, someone will investigate." "He's playing them," Velshara whispered. "Brilliantly," Torish agreed. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to break off and find another target. We're going to continue our route, and neither of us will report this encounter. Everyone survives and goes about their business. Sound good?" The pirate was clearly calculating odds, and Marcus pressed his advantage. "Oh, we can do this the hard way," he said. "You open fire, and we start venting cargo. Your ships get contaminated, and maybe you disable us before the reactors breach. Congratulations, you've captured a radioactive wreck with no cargo worth salvaging and probable Tepu investigation." "That's a terrible trade." Silence stretched across the channel. Finally, the pirate spoke. "You're insane." "I'm practical," Marcus corrected. "And I'm giving you an out. Take it." More silence. Then the pirate made a gesture, and the channel cut. Chaktik watched his sensors. "They're breaking formation," he reported with wonder in his voice. "They're leaving," the helm officer confirmed. The 4 pirate vessels began to pull away, and within minutes, they had jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared from sensors entirely. The bridge erupted in relieved chatter, but Marcus simply slumped against the console. His hands were shaking slightly, and Chaktik realized that despite the confident performance, Marcus had been terrified the entire time. "How did you know they'd believe you?" Captain Torish asked. "I didn't," Marcus admitted. "I made my best guess based on psychological profiling and hoped they'd value survival over profit. Former Kresh forces are brutal, but they're not suicidal. Give them a plausible reason to retreat, and they'll take it. There are no unstable reactor cores in Cargo Bay 3, are there?" Surish asked as he returned to the bridge. "Just standard manufacturing equipment," Marcus confirmed. "I manipulated the environmental readings to mimic reactor signatures and counted on their sensors not being sensitive enough to detect the difference." "You bluffed," Velshara said. "I played the odds," Marcus replied, "and I used their own tactics against them. Kresh forces relied on psychological intimidation to control opponents. I just turned that around and made them intimidated of us." Torish moved closer to Marcus. "You saved the ship without firing a single shot," he said. "Because violence should always be the last option, not the first," Marcus said. TEPU training. Emphasize winning without fighting whenever possible. Combat is expensive and risky. Psychological warfare is cheap and effective if you know how to use it. KTIK's antennae waved with admiration. "You became the predator they feared," he said. "I reminded them that predators have to assess risk versus reward," Marcus corrected. "They weren't willing to risk contamination and investigation for a merchant ship's cargo. Simple calculation. The bridge crew began to relax as the danger passed and normal operations resumed. But Galactic noticed that Marcus's hands continued to shake slightly as the adrenaline wore off. Later that evening, the young Vraxi found Marcus in the common area, once again cleaning his knife. The human's movements were slower and more deliberate than usual, as if the knife was heavier than it should be. "You didn't use it," Galactic observed. "No," Marcus agreed. "But you were prepared to if necessary." Marcus paused in his cleaning and looked at the blade. "The knife stayed sheathed," he said. "Just like always. But the capacity was there," Galactic pressed. "Always," Marcus confirmed. "That's the point. I maintain the capacity while choosing restraint. Today I chose psychological warfare over physical combat, and it worked. That's what all the training and philosophy comes down to in the end. Making the right choice in the moment even when you're terrified." "You were scared?" Galactic asked with surprise. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "But fear doesn't mean inability. It just means you understand the stakes. I was scared for the crew and scared my bluff wouldn't work, and scared I might have to fight after all. But I did it anyway." HKTIK's antennae waved thoughtfully. "This one understands now," he said. "The knife represents not what you do, but what you choose not to do. Every single day," Marcus agreed. "That's the real victory. Not defeating enemies, but defeating the part of yourself that wants simple, violent solutions. The blade stays sharp, but it stays sheathed." He finished his cleaning and held the knife up to examine it one final time before sliding it back into its sheath. The emblems caught the light briefly, then disappeared from view. But Galactic knew they would always be there, and Marcus would always carry them. A reminder of capability held in check and power restrained by choice, and the daily decision to be something other than what he was trained to be. The monster that refused to break its own leash, the weapon that chose to be a tool, the human who carried violence like a burden but wielded restraint like a shield. And perhaps that was the real message of humanity's philosophy about warfare and peace. That true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect, and the discipline to choose mercy even when vengeance was within reach. The knife remained sharp and ready, but it also remained unused. And in that simple fact lay hope that civilization could endure even in a dangerous galaxy, protected by those willing to carry the burden of capacity without succumbing to the temptation of use, guarded by humans who understood violence well enough to prevent it,